live. Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest episode of the Living Process videos. We could still call it a podcast on YouTube. And so today I am speaking with Chris, who is an in-the-field journalist, someone with an extensive background with a higher degrees in philosophy and history, who's been doing fantastic on-the-ground reporting about the current events in Ukraine. And a great place to find him is on Twitter at TORQUEMADA Stark, STARK. You can find him there. I'm also going to put a link in the description.
That is a horrible thing.
Hello.
Hello there. Thank you for introducing me. I have to do a little explanation about the Twitter handle. See,
Sure.
I had the one for my podcast called The Eastern Border, where I have been trying to explain the Soviet history from a people's perspective for a long while. And then we suddenly switched to politics and everything. But this Twitter handle, you see, I was banned from Twitter because of Russian trolls. I was mass flagged for terrorism and all the nice things. And now I'm rebuilding. But as I wasn't allowed to make new accounts, I had to dig up my account, which I made when I was 16 or something. Yeah, and it's Torquemada Stark. Torquemada in reference not to the Inquisitor of Spain, but to Warhammer 40k figure, and Stark in reference to the Game of Thrones Stark. That's a very silly nickname, but that's the one that I can use these days because I can't make new accounts or they'll be instantly banned. So I had to switch to my old one, which is why you have such an edgy name attached to a podcast that's, I've grown up, but if I have to use this to stay in touch with people, so I do. And I have a penchant for arts and architecture as well, because, you can't really lose that stuff. It keeps you alive and sane. And, David's been on my show, and we had a great collaboration there, very popular one. A lot of people were arguing about the building, the MIT one. That was horrible. But I hope that we get to talk about a lot of interesting stuff today, because today, thankfully, is a bit of a day off for me, and I don't have to focus on the horrid things. But thank you, David, for having me on, and I'll just let you speak because I've been speaking too much already.
Yeah, there's been, I think the last time that we spoke, we had touched upon the stadiums, that there was, this is something that I think fascinates us both. And one reason that I'm glad we have the video situation is, I've done this before. People can complain if this is a terrible thing to do. I don't think this is so bad. So with this is a website that I absolutely love. You can go and see all the different baseball stadiums. That's showing you there. This has special meaning for people both in New York and the Los Angeles area. That's Ebbets Field, where the Brooklyn Dodgers used to play. And then you can compare it. You can compare it to all the other things. And you can compare that to, there's Tiger Stadium, which would be great to go over, right, and then Dodger Stadium. And you can see how different they are, because it's to scale pretty much.
Oh, that is very useful, yeah. And people can complain about many things, but when you try to stick to things and want to do something in formats, you gotta accept that at one point you can choose to be professional in one of two things: either making your content and being an expert on your field, or figuring out how all this stuff works. I recently discovered Discord for once, which has surprised me because we watched Russian propaganda together and everything. So that was great, but we're working on all this stuff. I have a Latvian football stadium myself that I wanna show you, and I'll send a link so that you can. I think I can maybe figure out. We have like a new roof set up, because for one, it's an interesting situation because we're having our national song and dance festival here, because stadiums are not just used for sporting events. And ours is going to be a main venue for the National Folk Dance Festival, because I used to be a dancer for many years, and they just built a roof on that one. You can figure how this is going to be put up. It's in the city center. It's somewhat close to the center. It's called the Daugava Stadium. Daugava being the main river of Riga.
Okay.
It's quite near where I live, a couple of blocks away. And it's being set up for all this celebration and everything. It's surrounded by nice early 20th century working class district, as stadiums were, and that's the home base of one of our main teams there. Because we play soccer, obviously, we don't have a dedicated baseball stadium in Latvia, but we have something improvised, because near our faculty of social sciences, on the back there, they have a stadium built for baseball-ish, where all the American expats bring their kids to play baseball on Saturdays, which is, by the way, how I met
Oh,
a bunch
nice!
of them.
It's just a small practice stadium. I think some of those are really nice. When I first moved to this area, I moved the business here from Iowa. It was briefly in Iowa. We designed one house and we're starting on a few other projects, and then came out here in 2020. Actually, came out here, and there was this fantastic place up in Altadena, which is north of Pasadena, and right in the foothills, there's this beautifully done little field that feels like a stadium because it's so nicely done. And some of those can be really charming. And so I wanted to show everybody. I think that I could edit this stuff in later, but I tell myself that I could do that and I can, but then I never end up doing it. So that's why I keep it simple with this type of lo-fi editing. But I need to see. There we go. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what Christoph had sent me. So that's that's the stadium to look at. That's very charming. Is that a new one?
That's not a new one. I'm gonna look when that was built, because that's the old one. We have a new Skonto one, but this is where things happen. This is where we play parts of. It's closed for a bit now because it got renovated. I just want to check when it was built, because that was the first one we got here. Mm-hmm. When was it? When was it built?
That's such a wide track and field situation.
It was built in 1927, and it was built because of a sporting organization, workers sport and guard, workers sporting events and for guard. There used to be a one where they held militia things. They had track and field and everything. It was up there since 1927, and currently it's being rebuilt.
And then it's a really huge kind of track and field area around it. It sets it'll create a different viewing angle. That's one of the things that's very interesting about the different stadiums, is that they'll have a combination of how far back you're set from the field, from how high up you are, will change your perspective on the game, right? Have you seen games in that?
I have, yeah. And the thing that's important about this is that it's about, I don't know, half an hour's walk from the city center, from the old town. It's not that far. It's really close.
Okay.
Because it was back then, it was built there for the working class people to just come in, and militia were trained there. Because Riga wasn't as big back then. This is pre-Soviet era. These used to be the outskirts. Because Riga is built very concentric. You have the very German old town, then you have the Art Nouveau, kind of outer circle, and then on the very far out there's all these Soviet buildings. And this was built there in 1927, and people just came to it. But then again, our number one sport here is ice hockey, or just hockey as we call it here. So they have a different attitude towards them. I'm one of the very few soccer fans. I do have to mention to your listeners, however, I am an international athlete, by the way, but not in the sport you might think. I have played a single game in the Latvian cricket national team. Yes, cricket
is a fascinating game. It's one of the ancestors of baseball, along with rounders. I'm not familiar so much with the rules of cricket, but
me neither.
Amazing.
What happens? Like we have apparently a Latvian national cricket team where our immigrants from India and Pakistan play, and they play other Baltic teams. But apparently, and some of them listen to my show as well. And apparently, in the national rules set, there's like the thing that you have at least to have one national-born player on your squad. And theirs was like got on the flu or something. So I was basically plopped up and called like, Kristaps, our guy is sick. Can you please come and throw the ball once? And then can you stay at bat once? And then just move off. And I did.
That was the minimum.
That was the bare minimum.
All right. Well, cricket, one of the interesting things about cricket is cricket's done on an oval pitch. So it does fit into a soccer stadium nicely. Something that happens, I'd be curious about, maybe we can get to this later, about how stadiums integrate into neighborhoods. It's always very important and interesting. Now, there's a great contrast here. We can see Dodger Stadium was kind of a transitional stadium. So you can see that the older stadiums, they were kind of built, they ended up being criticized in the modernist era as just being these kind of ramshackle things, but they were charming like that. I liked them like that. And nowadays, when the modernist stadiums are seen as disgusting and horrible, I think rightly so, that no one likes them. I think almost all of the modernist stadiums are gone. And now they've gone to newer stadiums that try on purpose to do what these kind of unconsciously did. But you can see the reason why it's all clipped. Ebbets Field is clipped like that is that might have been, Flatbush Avenue is the famous address. That might be Flatbush, it might be something else. The whole reason that the Dodgers are called the Dodgers is because the streetcar lines are right there, the trolleys. And so if you went to go see the game, you had to run across all the tracks. So they nicknamed the fans the Trolley Dodgers.
Oh yeah, that's the thing about stadiums. One thing that I want to touch on is the emotional value of how people get attached to them, and this is why this is why, for example, when all the brands buy it and everything, that things are named for advertisement reasons. Oh yeah, that hurts a lot of people. But interestingly enough, as I was researching about this, if we come to soccer, again, I know very little about baseball, so you're going to have to lead the conversation about that. But the poshest, the nicest stadium in soccer is for Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham Hotspur, I think. Again, British names.
That one up.
Yeah, that's the poshest one. The thing is, they are perpetual underachievers. They haven't gotten any trophies, and so they always play, and they're considered part of the Big Four or the Big Six in the English football, but they never achieve anything, and they're considered the perennial losers. They always, when they get to the final, they lose, and they can't hold a proper season. And there's been massive scandals around them all over the place, but they have the best stadium apparently, and apparently people are being angry because they are underachieving, being a club from London and from a posh London area, as I've been told, and they just underachieve. What about baseball thing? I checked on what we spoke about when you were on my show. While you're looking at this,
the Tottenham Stadium.
Yeah, it's a big one, apparently very, very posh, as I've been told. Thing is, I'm just wondering, can you play baseball in a soccer stadium, in a large one? You technically could if you set up the plates right.
Yes, you can, but it wouldn't work all that well. There was a time in U.S. history when they had this grand displacement of the baseball teams before, in the scant years before such ridiculous stuff like that was being built. So compare that. That's Riverfront Stadium that used to exist in Pittsburgh. It's gone now.
Well, a question is, why is this ridiculous? Because for me, how I see baseball in America as a cultural icon, right? I see baseball more as a cultural thing, and I understand that it has to be kind of in touch with the people. So you mostly would want the spectators to be involved with the game, to see the game better. I think that's kind of the part of it. Because stadiums for a lot of the community, especially the working class, is usually the place where they go and relax on Saturday. No matter what sports it is, it's always tied to the whole community issue.
Absolutely, and part of the big problem of those modernist stadiums would be that they're surrounded by parking, and so that really kind of sucks the air out of the vibrance of what can happen. Now, what it does is that people fill in their own kind of fun, which always happens with a culture. And you get things like tailgating, which I'm sure happens in Europe to some extent, where people kind of camp out in the parking lot and they come early and they have grills and hot dogs and stuff. And that's a big thing for football, especially where I'm from in Wisconsin with the Packers. That's a big deal. I wanted to bring this up. I wanted to bring up Dodgers LA Coliseum, because before those big stadiums were built, the baseball was played in, baseball was played in football stadiums or Olympic stadiums, because they didn't have the new baseballs. Before Dodger Stadium was built, the Dodgers played at the LA Coliseum, so you had to angle it weirdly like that. You had a very short home run to right field and an incredibly deep left field. And it was a little bit weird. There was no upper deck. The seats were kind of odd, but and then you would have a special time in the fall when the football teams would play and would run over the dirt because the baseball dirt would still be there because they hadn't covered it up because baseball season and football season would overlap. And that doesn't happen so much anymore because pretty much everywhere they all have the same stadiums. So you could play baseball in baseball is so geometrically particular that it doesn't. Oh, here's an even better view. You see that that was probably taken from the Goodyear blimp, right? You can see how it fits.
Oh, that's really nice. But it's like weird though in a way. Like the
it is. The LA Memorial Coliseum is one of the most beautiful football stadiums in the whole world. It was, I think, it had several Olympic situations, and it's a very nice place. But baseball is so geometrically particular that it kind of demands its own shape.
The shape is the diamond, right? The question is, what exactly counts as a home run? Please explain to me, and probably many
sure.
if you're realize, because for one thing, I know that you have to account for what is a home run. Apparently, I had to reread the rules. If you strike the ball, then you run from base to base, and then there's something called a home run if you hit it out of bounds. And I'm always wondering, like, if the bounds are not set, then what do you count as a home run?
So what happens is that you got home plate here, the pitcher there. If you hit a ball that goes over the outfield fence, but it's between these 2 points, those are called the foul lines. If you hit a ball that lands anywhere between these 2 lines, between first base and third base, if it lands there, it's considered an actual hit. If it lands anywhere outside, that's a foul ball and it doesn't count. And then there are complicated things, well, not that complicated, but detailed things about whether that counts as a ball or a strike, et cetera. If you catch it in fly territory, you're still out. So that's another thing with baseball stadiums, is that baseball stadiums that have a lot of space back there, some have more space than others, that becomes a disadvantage to the hitters and an advantage to the pitchers. Because if someone hits a foul ball, your catcher will run back and catch everything and get people out. But a home run is if you hit it over the fence between these 2 foul poles. This is something that pretty much everybody in the United States will remember if you're of a certain age, but I would recommend any sports fan anywhere to Google this. Just YouTube Carlton Fisk home run. And this was a World Series that the Red Sox lost, but it's an utterly iconic moment because sometimes it's very exciting. You don't know whether it's going to go fair or foul, and you get 50,000 people all holding their breath until they know which way the home run is going to go. But there was a key game in the World Series, the championship. The Red Sox ended up losing because they hadn't broken the curse yet. There's a curse. It got broken, but not then. This was in the 70s. Carlton Fisk, the catcher, gets up to the plate. This is in the movie Good Will Hunting. They talk about it. So he gets up and hits the home run, and no one knows if this is in Fenway. No one knows if it's going to go fair or foul. And he's sitting there and he's going like this, and he's watching, and he's going. And then as soon as it clears, he jumps up like that and he runs around the base is still jumping. And that's, sometimes there's a question as to whether it's gonna go fair or foul. And the older stadiums made it more interesting. This was kind of standardized. The reason this was standardized is because they wanted it to be baseball, football, and soccer all at the same time, which you can do, but it makes the stadium neither fish nor fowl.
This doesn't work that way because it's round.
Yeah.
And where do you kind of like cut, if you would like cut off parts of it? I guess
they do.
Oh wait, your screen turned off.
There we go. So the way this happens is that they rotate this. There are big, heavy industrial tracks around the perimeter. And so they separate these stands here. The lower stands separate here. And for football, that used to roll out this way. And this would roll out that way. And it seemed like such a great idea. But like many things with modernism, it seemed like a great idea on paper. But then it was just not so great to live in and to experience. But they tried to, with these stadiums, the all-purpose stadiums, some people call them concrete donuts, they tried to please everybody and ended up pleasing nobody.
Yeah,
but these old things are dinosaurs.
That's the thing. Like when people try to please everyone, they please no one. That's a whole issue. And again, it's also about commitment in a way, because I've noticed here in Latvia, when we have some new projects built, they want to build a new concert hall and everything, it always goes up for vote and public discussion. No one participates in the public discussion, basically, and everything. And the thing is, like, some project wins, but then not because of any vision of the architect or the person building it, but because some politicians have gotten, because people missed the public discussion part, so now they're sending in complaints, and then some politician just stands up and changes the blueprint out of nowhere from his like random architect, just adding stuff into it, ignoring the original vision. That's how we've actually gotten some catastrophes in trade centers, where one of them actually collapsed because of this whole building material thing. Yeah, that was like Maxima tragedy. That's how it was called. But this always changes, because at one point you have to understand that it's kind of like when you assign projects to build public buildings in general, you have to trust the people doing the job. You have to, if you commit to something, you stay with it. You do not change it midway to accommodate some other thing. Otherwise, what's the point? Just those
That's
things.
Right.
You can accommodate some changes, but they will always end up being worse than the original idea if you hadn't done those ideas eventually, anyways. Like, and sports stadiums, like, they also always add new features on top of them. They always want to figure something out, and then in the middle of building these things, you discover that you want your VIP section to be moved like a couple of meters or feet or whatever, and things just get messed up. And that's just not with stadiums. That's with basically everything. It's just that at some point the people funding the whole bill decide that, hey, we know better than those experts whom we've actually hired and paid. And that reflects on the community. But a well-built stadium can truly become like a center of the whole thing. It can be the soul of a whole community around it, I think. And not just because
there is an exception to this. I have to say, I agree with you that there is, and this is a whole important thing with architecture generally, is this question of process, about how you involve the public, to what extent, and then as you go along, what things, it's like software development in a sense, what things do you freeze and not change, and what things do you purposefully leave to fill in once you see something else. That's very, very important. There is an exception, there are probably several, but Green Bay is exceptional in many ways. They changed their stadium in a nice way, possibly partly because another way that Green Bay is an exception. I am part owner of the Green Bay Packers, and so is my sister, and so is my dad, and I think my mom, because
you have the club, like where the fans on the club thing. Yeah.
Yes, the fans on the club. It's one of the very few teams that does that.
I'm a partial owner of decision maker of Bayern Munich, by the way. I bought a single share. Nice. It's just, I'm a fan of these guys, but yeah, it makes sense. And this makes sense.
That's City Stadium. That's what it was like when Vince Lombardi and the Packers were winning championships in the 60s. But they changed it over time. They expanded it, and they did a pretty good job. What it looks like now, well, this is what it looked like in the 1990s when Brett Favre was the quarterback. They've updated it since then. There we go. Because you had that open end zone. They've done it pretty nicely, and I'll try to come up with something now. And they added this whole thing, which in Wisconsin, it's very nice when it's cold out. They used to not have that part. You used to have to be, back in my day, you were cold no matter what. But now they have a place where you can go warm up. And let's see.
Yeah, that's the other thing, because the listeners, I was talking about, some of my Latvian friends posted something about weird Latvian homes being built in the wrong way. And David brought up a nice thing that, you can't really build square stuff when it snows. I'd never thought of this, but then again, I'm not an architecture expert, because, it makes sense, because everyone, all the time here, we have to deal with like these beautiful Art Nouveau buildings, and they're really great, but for some reason they have like very tiny, nice little roofs where you can't go on there. And if snow packs up on that one, you're gonna run into trouble.
Yeah, pitched roofs are very important for climate. Climate is one of the main considerations when you're. They talk about vernacular styles. Vernacular is a good, useful word sometimes. Vernacular meaning a locally organic style. Right, like you'll have in Santa Fe, you'll have adobe houses. Makes sense. Flat roofs, beams, adobe walls makes sense. Great sense for that climate. If you had adobe houses in India, that would be horrible. You know, it rains so heavily every
talking
year.
About, I can say, by the way, a lot of bad things about modern day Russia, of course. But this is Krestovsky Stadium, which houses St. Petersburg teams. And if you know a little something about geography, you know where St. Petersburg is. This and look at how that is housed. That is, I think, really good for the climate, for how the climate works, because there isn't a single slope. It's basically dish surface. It all falls down, and they have to clean it up, but it's meant to basically facilitate the snow just falling off of it naturally. And then they have, of course, things that people in warmer climates do not have to contend with is just that we're used to having parts of our walkways in the streets be cordoned off when the snow is melting, because falling snow, having issues, people cleaning it off from their houses.
Right. So this is a really interesting one, actually. That's a nice stadium. I like that. I'll try to make sure that this is going to be visible. Got to be able to see my situation. That should do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's one of the very few stadiums that was built in like modern day Russia, which wasn't totally destroyed, because everything they built for the Sochi Olympics, for example, oh man, that's in such a disrepair. And the thing is, like, you have to have a culture for it as well. You have to understand some things about it. And the thing is, I read that, you know, in the stadiums, recently heard a conversation about locker rooms. Apparently those are really interesting as well. How people, you know, feel in their rooms as well.
Yeah, locker rooms are a big deal. And then there's the strategic sense of locker rooms. There are some people who have made odd choices. There's this thing. Have you ever heard of Bank Miller Pink, aka Drunk Tank Pink?
I know that one, because you can't pay this. The thing is, like, we were taught this in our, you know, university, because in philosophy courses these days they teach you some marketing tricks, and yes, if you look at certain colors of pink, that makes you feel more calm, and more relaxed, and not as violent or aggressive. The problem is, when it comes to sporting events, you want yourself, in your team, to be going maximum adrenaline overdrive. But it was to such a point where I think away teams lost 17% more games if they were forced to change in this pink colored rooms than anything else. That's another, by the way, issue, which is interesting, because if you've noticed in the malls, short tangent, but this is a really good one. If you've noticed that in the malls, the first entryway when you enter, there's always some sort of a bakery that bakes, I don't know, cinnamon buns or whatever, or some perfume store, something sweet in the air. Apparently, women are more likely to make spontaneous purchases when there's sweet smells around in the air. And like, that's not being sexist here. It's just that it's, for some reason, they do. And of course, if there's a kink in human psychology that the marketing guys will use, then they'll use them. The same about how for example, like, there's the same trick as, for example, with too many details sometimes. The same trick is, like, if you have a kid and you go to a toy store, if you bring him to like a whole like section of toys and ask him to pick one, he'll just be confused and go away. It doesn't work. What you have to do is, like, pick 3 toys. 2 is not enough. 2 is like a binary choice. Binary choices are difficult for our brain. So you have 3 choices, illusion of choice, you pick one of them, the kid buys the toy, goes away happy. And that's another thing about all these situations. And then you kind of think about how these stadiums are built for the community. And I'm pretty sure the people who build these things, they look at it from the kind of this perspective side, and they also look about this image of the club also. It also appears with a lot of choices, because the people who play for a certain team, they got to see the stadium more than any other. They play all the home games there, right? And the fact how the stadium appears and how it looks, it also definitely these days is being, you know, designed to inspire the players to do better. Psychology plays such weird tricks on you that you don't even notice sometimes. And I'm pretty sure that at least some of these stadiums incorporate that into their own architecture. Everyone likes columns, for example, because columns remind us of ancient Roman glory and victories and all this stuff. Sure. And everyone likes Colosseums. Talking about Colosseums, man, I like to give a shout out to the original stadium in Rome, you know, not the original stadium, but the Colosseum. Apparently, there was a Russian tourist there who managed to get himself like in search for police because someone just last week literally took a knife and carved in Ivan plus Helena equals love 2023 in the Colosseum.
That's crazy. That's awful.
That is awful.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's kind of like, I'm sorry, guys, if you go to a place of ancient history, you do not do this thing. Please do not do not desecrate things which matter to people, which are cultural heritage. Even these stadiums. I mean, hey, I know Fenway Park the best, again, because of Fallout 4 video game. Because in Fenway Park there was the whole central game part there. But baseball means a lot to a lot of people, and if someone would just go on and desecrate things, that would be awful. Talking about the worst stadiums. Yeah.
So talking about columns, this is one of my favorites for columns. This is Forbes Field. They tore this down in 1969 or 1970 in Pittsburgh. That was a gorgeous stadium, and that was kind of a different. It was built around maybe 1912, 1910ish, and so it was like modern. That was seen at the time as ultra modern because it was industrial, but they did it beautifully. That's kind of a good example of how even though styles change, columns are always still a thing that people love. That's one of my favorites.
We have these things. I mean, if we're talking about stadiums, I'm going to open. I'll be shameless and send you a Wikipedia page, but we have to talk about Old Trafford. That's the home of the Manchester United, and these are well, besides the Wembley Stadium, this is if you think about football in England or soccer, then that's just the biggest one there is, and the most kind of most rich with all the history. It was built, I think, in 1902. Oh, sorry, construction broke ground in 1909. It's an old one. It's called Old Trafford, and it's just for the people in there. It means a lot. Because again, I recently
speaking. Yeah. Sorry, speaking as a Yank, for all the Yanks who don't follow football closely, is this the famed Manchester United who play here?
Yes, the Old Trafford is home of Manchester United. Wembley Stadium is reserved for national team things, but this is the one where where everything happens. These English football fans, English soccer fans for the Americans, they are as fanatical as you guys are, and every house, they often talk about, for example, metaphorically turning your home ground to a fortress. You might lose away games, yes, but there is a certain culture in turning your home ground into a fortress where your fans are there as an extra team player and everything. I wonder how this works in baseball, because in baseball, again, I had to study for every time we talk, David. I have to do an extra research. This time it was on baseball, and I understood the fact that baseball teams play so much more games, and although it's a team sport, because of the impact of like in soccer. Each individual in the team, they still function as a unit. But in baseball, it's always like this one-on-one duel between the pitcher and the batter. Therefore, everything's very statistics based. I wonder how people kind of associate that. Do people have traditions in these stadiums? Yeah, that's the old one. And the problem.
Yeah, there definitely are. There definitely are stadium traditions. There are all kinds of them. What are you thinking about particularly with the way that?
Well, for one, like soccer does not allow mascots on the field, and soccer does not have cheerleaders. I'm not sure if baseball has cheerleaders either. I know that I've seen that people have like been wearing silly hats and running around waving different objects around the field and everything. But I'm just wondering, are there any ground-specific traditions? Because when it comes to soccer, my favorite team in England is West Ham United, and they have these ginormous blowing like bubble machines. So if West Ham score a home goal, they launch these soap bubbles in the air, playing the song "Blowing Bubbles," which is a national anthem, and that's one of the stadium-specific things.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's something something in baseball like this. Like, is there some things that people, I don't know, who, again, my limited baseball knowledge, but say, I don't know, Dodgers players do in their home ground, some sacred spot, some sacred thing, these superstitions associated with these buildings themselves, because they house legends after all.
There are several of them. There are several great ones. I'll give you 3 examples. One example, two examples that are closest to my heart growing up where I was always a White Sox fan because the Brewers, it was too depressing back when I was growing up. They're doing better now than they did in the 80s and the late 80s and the 90s. So the White Sox had what they call an exploding scoreboard, that if you hit a home run, there would be fireworks. Fireworks would shoot out of the scoreboard, and there were these big pinwheels that would start with lights on them. They would look like spinning pinwheels, and so it would be this fantastic, spectacular thing that would happen. In Milwaukee, they did this, I think, in the 70s, and then also again starting when they went to the new stadium. They had Bernie Brewer. He was the mascot that they started with, that they brought back. He's like a little German guy with a mustache and a hat, and he's like he brews beer. And so if they hit a home run, he waves to the crowd and jumps up and down, and then slides down a slide into a cartoonishly huge beer mug, and then balloons come out of the beer mug. And so that's people like that. There's also the sausage race, the famous sausage race between the chorizo. It's a bit of an ethnic rivalry. The chorizo sausage races the American hot dog. The American hot dog, the chorizo sauce. No, the Polish sausage, who just dresses like a Polish American. He doesn't dress in traditional Polish things. He wears a hat and sunglasses. There's the chorizo sausage, who has a mustache and wears a sombrero. And then there's a German bratwurst. And these mascots run around the bases, and everybody cheers and makes bets as to which sausage will win. They do that during the seventh inning. At Wrigley Field, they sing. The announcer, Harry Carey, used to be famous for singing with the crowd. They have famous people do it now every game in Chicago. And one of the most famous, you talk about sacred places, Billy Crystal, actually, he talks about this in the documentary. He used to actually believe that Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Miller Huggins, I think, he used to actually believe that these great baseball heroes were actually buried in the stadium, because they have this place called Monument Park, where these famous Yankee players at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx in New York, they had all died in kind of sad ways. Lou Gehrig of Lou Gehrig's disease, Babe Ruth of throat cancer. And they have these monuments to them that used to be on the field, like the baseball used to be able to hit them. And it's called Monument Park these days. But so yeah, they're cenotaphs actually. They are actually memorial cenotaphs to the great heroes of the Yankees. So yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, the thing is, like, I just realized I have to tell you that if we're talking about stadiums, I sent you two links. It's about Luton Town. Luton Town is you'll probably understand this because okay, Americans in your leagues, you do not have promotion or relegation. But in European sports, what happens is that if you play in the top league, you can basically, if you end up in some of the last places, you get relegated to a league below that. And Luton Town, who used to be one of the founding clubs of the Premier League, had fallen down below even like League 2, and that's like Tier 5 of English football. And they climbed back up again. In their stadium, basically, they got promoted to Premier League through all the nonsense. But if you open up the Guardian article, you'll see where the stadium is located. Now, one of the entrances there is basically through and over someone's garden. They're now investing 10 million pounds to kind of improve the stadium for Premier League standards, because they hadn't played it for like 25 years or something. And they're improving this. This is going to be the most compact, the weirdest, smallest stadium ever. They're improving it to fall under Premier League standards, but it's tiny.
I like that one.
And those are like private gardens. And one of the entrances to the place, like the two in the lower corner, they're there over people's gardens. And it's always a huge fun because everyone now supports Luton Town. Everyone now is cheering for Luton Town because they're improving these things. I hope they don't go down. This was this was the biggest thing here. They'll be playing there next season, and everyone's just wondering about how the big football stars are going to appear there. What I want to check out, by the way, is if you can find, because this stadium has to be improved now, but it still has an entry just across someone's garden from the backside because they're a small club.
I hope they preserve that, because that's really charming.
Yeah, it is one of those things. But On the other hand, I want to check out if you can please find me, because I wasn't able to find a clear message. Inter Miami Stadium. I think it was Inter Miami. Messi's going there. All the people who want to follow soccer, the Americans are getting a blast. Like Messi just went to MLS, and that's insane. And he's going to be playing. I think it's Inter Miami, if I'm not mistaken. But I'll check this now.
By the way, I think this is the example that you're talking about.
Yeah. That's the thing. I don't know. They built it as a very tiny stadium and everything, and they're gonna keep it all up. Yeah. But yeah, United States are now getting the. I know maybe you guys don't care about soccer. Yeah, it's Inter Miami. You guys don't care about soccer as much as we do, but guys who are in Florida, I think Miami's in Florida, right? I hope I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Florida is basically Central and South America. It always has been to a certain extent.
Well, football will be big there. If you live in Florida, then I highly recommend you go actually see your Inter Miami games, because you literally managed to snatch the world's currently best footballer, and he won the World Cup last year with Argentina, so that moves him up. That moves him higher, because there's always been this Ronaldo versus Messi debate. But Messi has won a World Cup, Ronaldo hasn't. So you guys, I'm pretty sure no one's going to go there, but I hope that this also gets some nice atmosphere. One interesting thing I want to talk about, again, sorry for the disruption thing, I'm just looking at my notes here. There's always the talk about curses. For some reason, they talk about curses in the stadiums.
Yes.
Man, when AFCON happened, the African Cup of Nations, there were rumors about witch doctors. And in 1980 Olympics, again, for whom special stadiums were built, there were special shamans brought in. It's just all serious business. Are there any famous curses in baseball? Because baseball seems to me like a superstitious sport. Please do tell, because again, I'm pretty sure some of my European listeners are going to come up and watch this, and you will do well. I know this is only tangentially related to stadiums. It's just that I get someone that I can ask about these things.
I think that we're coming up. I think this is perfect timing, because we're coming up at about the kind of time where I've got to be moving on to do stuff. It's fantastic, and thank you. I think it's a great thing to end on. There are two things. There's one that I can mention very briefly, and then one in detail. Oh no, it's great. It's fine. It's fitting perfectly. But there's the curse of the Babe. Babe Ruth originally played for the Red Sox, and the owner of the Red Sox would end up spending all his money trying to become a big Broadway entertainment mogul. So he would go up to New York and fund all these Broadway musicals that he thought were going to be mega hits, and he was going to make tons of money. It failed. It always failed. So he kept getting in debt, and they told him, stop doing this. Stop trying to make Broadway hits. You're not good at it. You're good at running the baseball team. And so then he got in so much debt, and this was around about 1918 or 1919, maybe, something like that, because Babe Ruth was definitely with the Yankees in 1920. So this young pitcher, a pitcher named Babe Ruth, who was also really good at batting, but he sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees to cover a debt because of his Broadway gambling, and apparently that was seen as such a disgusting, disloyal
Wait, gambling?
Thing, especially not gambling. Did I say gambling? No.
I misunderstood.
It's because it was his debt because of his failed Broadway productions. He would go into debt, hope to make up the money on ticket sales, but the shows would close because they were terrible and no one wanted to see them. So he lost a bunch of money, and so he sold. He made a trade between the team. The Yankees, like this guy was like the next greatest guy in baseball. He really was, and the Yankees said, well, you're in a bunch of debt. You got this great player, Babe Ruth. We'll buy his contract. They bought out his contract. The guy settled his debt. The Yankees and the Red Sox hate each other to this day. You go to Boston and you'll hear like I hate the Yankees, effing Yankees.
Yeah, the thing is, like, that much I know. I had purchased a Yankees cap when I was in New York. And then I went to Boston with my Yankees cap, and I was very quickly explained not to wear that in public there. I got away because I'm a tourist and I'm polite, but obviously I instantly purchased a Red Sox hat and wore that instead. I mean,
I'll start some conversations, kid. I'll go like that for you.
Talking about Boston, by the way. Apparently, my namesake in NBA, Kristaps Porzingis, is now has been traded to Boston Celtics. So hey,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but that's like,
cool.
but like these superstitions are very weird because, again, some people just refuse to enter the thing.
Weirder.
What?
There's one weirder. So to finish the thought about the Red Sox, the Red Sox didn't win the World Series. So they kept losing. And then there's stuff about Bill Buckner where the ball runs through his legs. I wouldn't even get into that one. But they kept losing the World Series. And then finally, a few years ago, they broke the curse. So it was the curse of the Babe on the Red Sox for being so disloyal as to send Babe Ruth to the Yankees. The one that's even weirder than this, it involves a goat. It's weirder than this, that Wrigley Field, now the supposedly the first, this is apocryphal maybe, but supposedly the first day, now Chicago is a town where this was totally possible. There was some immigrant guy living in Chicago who still had a goat. And it was the first time the Cubs played in Wrigley Field, which probably would have been in the 20s. And the first time the Cubs played in Wrigley Field, it was the opening day, and this guy comes up, and he's an old immigrant guy in Chicago, and he says, "Yes, 2 tickets, please." Like, 2? "Yes, 1 for me and 1 for my goat." And it's like, "What, sir?"
Obviously, gentleman just has his goat. I mean,
yes, he wanted to go get his goat, and they wouldn't let him bring in the goat, so he starts yelling at them. He starts saying like whatever his language was, and whatever he was saying was not good, and he starts yelling and pointing and saying nothing good, whatever he does, and he says that they were cursed. So the Cubs were horrible for many years, and then they finally get a chance. And I was in Chicago. This was what was this? Was this 2005 or 6? I forget. But they felt like the curse. They lost the world. They lost in the playoffs in a very hard fought, wonderful to watch league championship series against the Marlins. Talking about home runs, there's something called a ground rule double. So there's a foul ball. A ball was going to be foul. One of the outfielders, I believe it was one of the Perez's, great guy. So he's a really great player. So I saw this on TV. He runs and he goes over, and if he had caught this ball, they would have won the game. They would have gone to the World Series. If he had caught this ball before every game of baseball, they say to the audience, "Please do not interfere with a ball in play. If you do so, you will be asked to leave the stadium." Because if you reach out and you grab something, it interferes with it, and they call it, and they send the hitter to second base, just as a rule. Now, if you don't interfere with it, you give the team a chance to catch it and get the guy out. That's what was supposed to happen. The guy ran up, very dramatic. He's going under it. He goes up the wall. His glove goes like this. And everyone's like, "It's going to catch it. They're going to win." And then this guy wearing a hat and glasses, he wants to get a souvenir ball, which happens if it's not in play. You get to take the ball home if they hit it into the stands. He reaches out. The guy's like, he reaches out and he grabs this Cubs fan, grabs the ball. And he's like, "Ah," and then everyone around him. And you can see the mouth of the player go back, and he's like,
that is the moment where I would require police escort to just jail him up for a night. Just jail him up for a night for his own security purposes.
I fixed his computer once, and when he came into the Apple store to the Genius Bar, he signed in under a fake name. And this was like a year and a half later. So he was genuinely scared, but somehow he sold the ball. So they thought, this is the curse. It's the curse of the goat. It's the Cubs curse. But then a few years later, they were going to be in the World Series again. And this is in 2016 when the world exploded. Donald Trump was president and the Cubs win the World Series. It was the apocalypse. Okay. But so they foiled the curse before that season because someone bought the ball that this guy caught. They call it the Bartman ball. His name was Jay Bartman. That was not made up. That's actually the guy's name. And so he I'm not doxing him. This is famous. So they buy the ball, and then what they do is they had an exorcism. The Cubs fans, probably at some bar near the stadium, had an exorcism. May or may not have had a goat there, a live pet goat or something. But they had an exorcism with like witch doctors or something, and then they exploded the baseball, which they thought that the curse, all the negative energy of everyone watching had gone into this ball, so they blew it up. And I'm not making this up. That year, Cubs win the World Series.
Okay, yeah, there's something to it. There's something to it. I don't even know. Yeah, they're just weird. But again, there's something about all this situation and all the sports things, and I'm really glad we had this talk because, like I said, it's sometimes it's kind of weird when people kind of expect just because you do a certain thing and you're sort of an expert in the field, they presume you become your profession completely and you lose all your hobbies and interests and everything else, and that you always must be strictly highly professional. Well, there is time for strictly highly professional everything, right? But then again, it's always humans doing this thing, and humans building stuff, humans reporting on things, and humans making human mistakes. So I'm really glad that I had this hour and to chat with you. And sorry for the random tangents. It's just that I'm not that good with architecture. I'm good with history stuff.
Yeah, man. These are good tangents. I really appreciated it.
Look.
I especially loved finding out about Luton. There's a Monty Python joke about Luton, and I never knew they had a great stadium. It's so cool.
It's a bizarre one. Anyways, I'll definitely have you on very soon, by the way, since I will advertise this. We're gonna. I think we need to do a collab on this thing. I found out that there's documentation about Chernobyl, and not just any documentation. It's the KGB materials where back when Andropov was not yet the leader, but they were building the whole thing. They were complaining about errors made in blueprints, errors made by builders. And at some point, it says that there are 20 centimeter kind of folds between the pipes where they should touch. The walls in some chambers are like of 27 to 37% angle from where they should be. I have all this documentation about. Ow. Yeah, that's a nuclear facility in Chernobyl. That's the thing where like the KGB investigators said to Andropov, "Hey, this isn't wrong," and the KGB went to the political party, the Communist Party, and told them, "Hey guys, maybe we should, be a bit tighter on this." But as this was a political project, yeah, the incompetence just ran. And I have a bunch of documentation and a bunch of people stating what exactly went wrong when building and blueprinting this stuff. I'll just have to translate it from Russian and present it to you for a good read before. But I can speak about the fact that it was probably very wrong. But I would like you on details on this, and we can maybe air it together. That's a bit of a teaser that sure. I want David on, because I think 20 centimeter falls between pipes and 27 to 37% slope on the walls if you're building a nuclear reactor that's kind of not what you want. Also, they apparently had
trouble.
They had skipped and stolen a bunch of steel, so some parts which should have had steel beams did not have them. And some of them were of inferior quality, as I said. There's a bunch of data, again, which I don't understand, which you might. But apparently the materials out of which Chernobyl was built also not so, let's just say, up to par. But I think you'll find it interesting. I'll translate this, and that's going to be a serious talk. That's going to be a serious professional talk where we're probably not going to have silly jokes, but I hope it's going to be interesting. But yeah, nice to be on your show, great. David, and thank you for making my evening nicer.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes, so, and we'll certainly look forward to that next time on Lidding Process Meets the Eastern Border. But yeah, Christoph, thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll talk soon.
Talk to you soon, man. See ya.